Have you ever felt completely alone for standing up for what's right? Have you ever wondered if your voice could make a difference, even when no one seems to listen? Imagine a world on the edge of collapse, families broken, traditions fading, hope just a whisper in the wind. Now picture a young man born into uncertainty, whose entire life is set apart by a calling he never asked for. His name is Jeremiah, not a warrior, not a king, but a prophet, a voice crying out in the storm. He wept for his people. He stood firm when others ran away. He was mocked, misunderstood, and thrown into darkness, simply for daring to tell the truth. But Jeremiah never gave up. Instead, his tears watered the seeds of hope that would grow for generations. Tonight, we dive deep into his journey, not just as a story from ancient times, but as a mirror for our world today. Because maybe, just maybe, you and I have a little bit of Jeremiah inside us. Maybe there's a calling on your life that feels heavy, or a truth you're scared to speak. What if courage looks like tears? What if strength means holding on to hope, no matter how many times the world lets you down? Let's discover together how Jeremiah's story can inspire us to find resilience in heartbreak, faith in the ruins, and the unshakable belief that every voice, no matter how lonely, can echo through history. Are you ready? Let's begin this journey. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be chosen even before you're born? Can destiny be woven into your story from the very first heartbeat? And if so, how would you know? Let's rewind the clock. Picture a small village on the edge of ancient Jerusalem. The air is still. A baby's first cry echoes through the home of a humble priest. His name, Jeremiah. But even before his family gave him that name, meaning the Lord exalts, or the Lord establishes, his life was already set apart. The scriptures tell us that God whispered a calling over Jeremiah's life long before he took his first breath. I knew you before I formed you in the womb. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Imagine carrying that weight, growing up with the knowledge that your purpose is written by a power greater than yourself. Jeremiah wasn't born into royalty. He didn't have the riches of kings or the armies of great men. He was a priest's son in a town most people would overlook. And yet, from the very beginning, there was a whisper, a sense that his life mattered, that it was meant for something more. You see, throughout history, some of the world's most remarkable leaders have spoken about a calling that began when they were young. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., who felt a sense of mission from childhood, practicing speeches in his bedroom mirror. Or Malala Yousafzai, who stood up for girls' education long before the world was watching. Even if their paths looked ordinary, there was a spark, a voice that kept nudging them forward. But here's where so many of us get it wrong. We ignore the signs. We tell ourselves, that's just a silly dream, or someone else will do it better. We let fear or self-doubt drown out the whisper of purpose. How many gifts, how many destinies have been missed simply because someone didn't believe their life could mean something bigger? But Jeremiah's story flips the script. It shows us that your calling is never defined by your background, your wealth, or even what others expect of you. Sometimes the greatest missions start in the quietest places. Sometimes God, or destiny, or fate sees something in you that no one else notices. And sometimes the first step is simply listening for that gentle voice inside, believing it's real. Personally, I believe that every person carries a spark, some hint of purpose that's waiting to be discovered. Maybe it's small at first, maybe it's buried under layers of self-doubt or pain. But just like Jeremiah, it's there, it's real, and it can shape not only your story, but the world around you. So ask yourself, is there a calling you've been ignoring, a gift you've dismissed, a dream you've buried because it didn't seem practical or you didn't feel worthy? Jeremiah's life reminds us, sometimes your calling is bigger than your beginnings. Sometimes you were made for something you can't even imagine yet. And maybe, just maybe, today is the day to start listening. So how did Jeremiah respond to his calling? Was it easy? Was it obvious? Or was the path to purpose much messier than he expected? Let's find out as we step deeper into his extraordinary journey. Have you ever felt too young, too unqualified, or simply too small to make a difference? What if your deepest convictions set you apart, made you the odd one out, even in your own community? And would you still speak up if every voice around you told you to stay quiet? That's exactly where Jeremiah found himself. Let's set the stage. The kingdom of Judah was unraveling. Once a land of faith and promise, it had slipped into a slow, heartbreaking decline. Corruption spread from the palace to the marketplace. Worship that once felt alive was now just hollow ritual. People chased after idols, ignoring the ancient wisdom that built their nation. And in the middle of this spiritual and moral wilderness, God called a teenager, Jeremiah, to be his messenger. Imagine the pressure. The elders had seen generations come and go. The priests clung to tradition, more interested in stability than in truth. Jeremiah's first reaction wasn't pride, it was panic. Who am I? He thought. I'm too young. No one will listen. Why would anyone believe me? But the calling didn't go away. It grew stronger. God promised, don't say you're too young. I am with you. You will go where I send you and speak what I command. Still, Jeremiah's voice was a whisper against a storm. People mocked him. Leaders rejected him. He was called a traitor, a pessimist, a troublemaker. He was accused of stirring up fear, of undermining hope, of not being patriotic enough. The truth, it turns out, is rarely popular, especially when it challenges power, especially when it asks people to change. Let's bring this ancient tension into our world today. Think of whistleblowers like Edward Snowden, who revealed uncomfortable truths about government surveillance, risking everything: career, freedom, even safety. Or Aaron Brockovich, who fought for clean water in a small town, standing up to a giant corporation despite ridicule and legal threats. They were both dismissed, doubted, and even attacked for exposing what others wanted to ignore. But their courage lit a spark. They made people think. They moved the world one honest word at a time. In every age, speaking the truth, especially as the outsider, is lonely and costly. But here's what most people get wrong. We think the moment isn't right, or that our voice is too weak, or our experience is too small. We worry about looking foolish, about being excluded, so we stay silent. But the greatest changes in history almost always begin with one voice refusing to back down. Personally, I remember a time when I felt unqualified to speak up. I worried about making waves, about being rejected. But looking back, I know that silence would have been the bigger mistake. And I wonder how many of us are missing our Jeremiah moment right now. The truth is, every community, every family, every workplace needs someone willing to ask the hard questions, to challenge what isn't right, to risk being unpopular for the sake of what's true. So if you ever feel too small, or too young, or too alone, remember Jeremiah. Remember every truth teller who changed the world by refusing to be quiet. Your voice matters. And maybe, just maybe, the wilderness is waiting for you to speak. But what happens when the cost of truth is pain? When compassion becomes a burden? Let's see what happens as Jeremiah's tears begin to flow, and his calling becomes a source of both heartbreak and hope. Have you ever wondered why some of the bravest people in history are the ones who cry the most? Can tears really change the world, or are they just a sign of weakness? And what does it mean to truly feel the pain of others so deeply that it breaks your own heart? Let's talk about Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. From the outside, he must have seemed an unlikely hero. He was known not for his victories in battle, not for grand speeches or stunning miracles, but for his tears. Day after day, Jeremiah stood in the streets and temples of Jerusalem, delivering messages that nobody wanted to hear. He watched as his beloved city drifted further into darkness, families torn apart, justice forgotten, faith replaced by empty rituals. And what did Jeremiah do? He didn't turn away. He didn't grow hard. Instead, he wept. He mourned for a people who refused to listen. He cried out for a nation running headlong toward disaster. His sorrow was raw, public, and deeply personal. Why did Jeremiah cry? Not just because he saw destruction coming, but because he loved his people so much that their pain became his own. Every warning he spoke came from a heart that was breaking. He was a prophet. But first, he was a man who cared. In today's world, we often admire leaders who seem invincible, untouched by emotion. But the truth is, the greatest leaders are those who let themselves feel. Think of Barack Obama standing before a nation after a tragic school shooting, wiping away tears as he spoke of lost children. Or Jacinda Ardern comforting grieving families after the Christchurch tragedy. Her empathy giving strength to an entire country. They didn't hide their hearts. They showed us that real courage means opening yourself to the suffering of others. But society still gets this wrong. Over and over, we're taught to toughen up, to hide our pain, to see emotion as a weakness to be overcome. We forget that the ability to cry for others, to let our hearts break for what breaks the world, is a mark of true strength. Jeremiah's story shatters the myth that compassion is a liability. His tears were not a failure, they were his gift. Through his sorrow, he showed his people, and us, what it means to love deeply, even when it hurts. I'll be honest with you, I used to think that leaders had to be stoic, unshakable, always in control. But the more I've learned about the world, the more I see that lasting change starts with empathy. It's compassion that drives us to action. It's sorrow that inspires us to heal what's broken. If you find yourself crying for the pain of others, don't be ashamed. You are standing in the tradition of prophets, healers, and world changers. You're showing the kind of courage the world desperately needs. And here's the real lesson. Empathy isn't weakness. It's the foundation of real, lasting transformation. When your heart breaks for others, you become the kind of person who can help mend the world. But for Jeremiah, compassion was just the beginning, because loving his people meant more than tears. It meant facing betrayal, rejection, and a price no one else was willing to pay. So what happens when your deepest love brings your deepest pain? Let's step into the fire with Jeremiah and see how conviction endures when everything else falls apart. Have you ever felt punished for telling the truth? Have you ever stood your ground only to find yourself more alone than ever before? What price would you pay to stand by your convictions, even when the whole world turns its back? This was Jeremiah's world. If you thought the life of a prophet was filled with honor and applause, think again. Speaking truth to power almost always comes with a cost. For Jeremiah, the price was heartbreak. He was mocked in the city he loved. He was rejected by friends, misunderstood by his own family, and treated like a traitor by the nation he was trying to save. There was a day when Jeremiah stood before the priests and rulers, warning them that disaster was coming unless they turned back to God. Instead of listening, they accused him of blasphemy and conspiracy. His words, meant to save, became a weapon used against him. But that was just the beginning. Jeremiah was arrested, beaten, and thrown into a pit, a muddy cistern deep and dark. Imagine being lowered down day after day, your voice echoing against cold stone, your hope nearly drowned out by the weight of rejection. He cried out, not just to God, but to anyone who would listen. But the silence was deafening. How does it feel to be betrayed by the very people you love? To know that your suffering is the result of staying true to your values, not turning away from them. In today's world, the fire Jeremiah faced hasn't gone out. It just burns in different forms. Think about the people who speak out for what's right, even when it's unpopular. Those who challenge corruption, confront abuse, or refuse to follow the crowd. Maybe they're whistleblowers risking their careers. Maybe they're activists shunned by their communities, or even ordinary people who lose friends and family because they refuse to compromise their beliefs. Cancel culture, exile from your own social circle, being branded as difficult, dramatic, or disloyal. For many, the hardest part isn't the criticism from strangers. It's the loneliness that comes when those you love most turn away. Here's where the lesson cuts deep. Society often rewards those who fit in, who keep the peace, who stay quiet for the sake of harmony. But sometimes, harmony is just another word for denial. Sometimes, the only way to heal a community is to risk its anger. Sometimes, holding on to your values is more important than holding on to acceptance. I've seen it firsthand in people who stood up against bullying at work, even when it cost them promotions or friends, and students who defended what was right, even if it meant eating lunch alone. And honestly, I've felt it in my own life. The sting of being left out, misunderstood, or even betrayed because I refused to compromise my conscience. Was it worth it? In the moment, it rarely feels like it. But when the dust settles, when you look back, you see that every trial, every pit, every night spent alone was forging something unbreakable inside you. That's the gift Jeremiah left us. He shows us that true strength isn't measured by applause, but by persistence in the face of pain. The world needs more people willing to face the fire, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they know that some things are worth any cost. So if you find yourself standing alone, remember, you're in good company. Your courage could be the spark that lights the way for others. But what if the fire isn't just about pain? What if, through surrender and trust, hardship is actually shaping us into something new? Let's look at Jeremiah's lesson of the potter and the clay and see how our darkest moments can lead to transformation. Have you ever tried so hard to control your life, only to realize that the more you fight, the more things slip out of your hands? What if true strength isn't about taking control, but letting go and trusting you can be remade? Let's step into one of the most powerful images in Jeremiah's story, the potter and the clay. Picture this. A humble potter sits at his wheel, spinning a lump of clay into something new. His hands are skilled but gentle. He pushes, pulls, and shapes the clay, sometimes starting over, sometimes making something beautiful from what looked like a mistake. God tells Jeremiah, "Go to the potter's house, and there I will give you my message." Jeremiah watches as the potter forms and reforms the clay. Sometimes the vessel collapses and the potter doesn't throw it away. He patiently begins again. The lesson is clear. God is the potter. We are the clay. He has the power to shape, to mend, to transform us, if we let him. But what does it really mean to live as clay? Let's talk about surrender. In American culture, we're taught that willpower conquers all, that winners never quit. But sometimes, refusing to let go is exactly what keeps us stuck. Look at the stories of people who found strength in surrender. Take a business leader who lost everything in a financial crash. At first, they tried to fight fate, denying the pain, blaming others, clinging to old plans. But it was only after accepting what had happened, after letting go of pride, that they found the courage to reinvent themselves and build something even greater. Or someone recovering from addiction. For years, they tried to fix it alone, hiding their struggle, pretending they were in control. Real healing only began the moment they admitted, "I can't do this by myself." They became clay, soft, open, ready for a new shape. Modern psychology backs this up. Research shows that people who accept what they can't change and are willing to grow through failure are more resilient, healthier, and even happier than those who fight reality at every turn. It turns out surrender isn't weakness. It's the beginning of real transformation. I've seen it in my own life. The times I've tried to force the future, I've ended up frustrated and exhausted. But the moments I surrendered, letting go of my plans and trusting something bigger, I've been surprised by how life opened up. Jeremiah's vision reminds us, if we see ourselves as clay, we can be shaped, we can be broken and remade again and again. No failure is final if we stay soft in the potter's hands. But the greatest mistake, thinking we have to do it all ourselves, or believing that being reshaped is a sign of failure rather than a gift. So here's the question. Where in your life are you gripping too tightly? Where do you need to let go to allow yourself to be remade? Being clay doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you're moldable. It means you trust there's a greater design at work, even in the setbacks, even in the pain. And that's how growth happens. It's how hope is born from hardship. So as Jeremiah's story unfolds, let's see what happens when brokenness gives way to hope, when a nation's darkest hour becomes the starting point for something new. Are you ready to let the potter work? Let's find out what comes next in Jeremiah's journey. Have you ever looked at devastation and wondered if hope could ever rise again? Is it possible for new life to bloom from the ashes of disaster? And when everything familiar has been swept away, can a new beginning really emerge? This is the heart of Jeremiah's story. His words shook a nation. Destruction is coming. Babylon will conquer. The temple, once the pride of Jerusalem, will fall. It was the darkest prophecy anyone could imagine. People wanted hope, but Jeremiah brought warning. For years, he pleaded with Judah to turn back to avoid disaster. But when the day finally came, when the enemy marched through the city gates, Jeremiah's voice changed. Yes, there was judgment. Yes, there was pain. But there was something more, something most people missed. In the ruins, Jeremiah spoke of restoration. He told of a day when God would gather the scattered people, when hearts would be renewed, and a new covenant would begin. A promise that hope could survive even the end of the world they knew. It's easy to hear messages of judgment and think it's the end. But Jeremiah's prophecies always held two sides, the reality of consequences and the promise of new beginnings. Let's see how this plays out, not just in the Bible, but in the world around us. Think about the Jewish people after the Holocaust, a tragedy so deep, many wondered if faith or culture could ever recover. Yet out of unimaginable suffering, communities rebuilt. They found meaning in memory, turned grief into music, art, and activism. Or look at American towns in the Rust Belt, once thriving with industry, then hollowed out by economic collapse. For years, hope seemed lost, but slowly, neighbors banded together. Empty factories became startup spaces and art studios. Where there was only loss, people found a way to create. Or picture a neighborhood flattened by a hurricane. Yet in the aftermath, strangers arrive with food, shelter, hands to help. Survival gives way to renewal. There's a huge difference between despair that ends in emptiness and prophetic warning that plants seeds for the future. Despair says, this is the end. But prophecy, real prophecy says, this is the beginning of something new. Too often, we mistake catastrophe for a final stop. We forget that every forest fire creates the soil for new growth. Every broken heart can become the birthplace of a stronger spirit. Personally, some of the hardest seasons in my life have been the doorway to change. A loss forced me to let go of old dreams, only to discover new possibilities I never could have imagined. The lesson? Tragedy does not have to be the last word. If we listen, if we dare to hope, ruins can become the foundation for something better. So if you're facing a crisis, remember Jeremiah. Remember every community that rebuilt from nothing. Remember that sometimes what looks like the end is really the beginning of a new chapter. And Jeremiah's promise was even bigger. A new covenant, a fresh relationship with God. Not written on stone tablets, but on the human heart. The message is clear. Restoration is always possible. Even in the ashes, hope can take root. So what does it look like to leave a legacy that endures, even when the world has changed? Let's turn now to Jeremiah's impact across generations and the challenge for us here and now. Have you ever wondered why some voices echo long after they've fallen silent? Why is it that the words of a lonely prophet from thousands of years ago still inspire us today? And what makes a legacy truly last, beyond fame, beyond fortune, beyond the moment? Let's talk about Jeremiah's legacy. Long after the fall of Jerusalem, after the temple lay in ruins, after his own life faded into the shadows of history, Jeremiah's impact only grew. He became a symbol, not just of grief, but of unwavering faith, a blueprint for spiritual endurance, even when the world seems lost. Why does Jeremiah's story still matter? Because he modeled something we're all hungry for, the courage to hold on to what's right, even when you stand alone. His tears turned into poetry, his suffering into scripture, his warnings into hope for generations. You can see echoes of Jeremiah's influence everywhere. Look at American art and music. From soulful spirituals sung by slaves to the folk songs of protest that shaped the civil rights movement, there's a Jeremiah-like voice lamenting injustice but dreaming of a new day. Painters and poets have captured the weeping prophet's spirit, using lament not just to mourn, but to push for change. Think of the marchers in Selma, Alabama, singing, "We shall overcome," their hope rooted in the promise that brokenness is not the end. Or Martin Luther King Jr., quoting Jeremiah in his sermons, reminding people that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. Even modern movements for truth and reconciliation, from the Me Too movement to climate activism, carry the DNA of the lonely voice. Someone willing to risk reputation, comfort, even safety to stand up for what's right. Here's the secret. It's often the ones who walk alone, who refuse to bend, who keep calling out in the darkness, that make the biggest difference in the end. But this comes at a cost. Society celebrates easy heroes, those who win quick victories or charm the crowd. But Jeremiah's kind of legacy is different. It's not about being liked. It's about being faithful. It's about lighting a candle that will burn long after you're gone. And that's something we can all reach for. Personally, I'm reminded of artists and activists I admire. People who spoke their truth, even when it meant losing friends, facing criticism, or seeing no results in their own lifetime. But their words live on. Their example gives me courage on hard days, and I hope it does for you too. So, what's the lesson? Legacy is not measured by applause, but by the seeds you plant for others. It's not about a single triumph. It's about inspiring others to hope, to fight, to rebuild. The story of Jeremiah tells us, you don't have to be the loudest or most popular to make an impact. You just have to be faithful to your truth, to your calling, to your compassion for the world. And maybe, years from now, someone will find courage in your story, just like we find it in his. As we reach the final chapter, ask yourself, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? Are you willing to be a voice for what matters, even if you have to walk the road alone? Let's bring Jeremiah's story home, where each of us can find our place in the unbroken chain of hope. Let me ask you something. Have you ever paused, just for a moment, and wondered what it would really look like to live out a story like Jeremiah's, not just to listen, but to actually let it change the way you move through the world? What if today you chose to be loyal to the truth, no matter what it cost? You see, Jeremiah never twisted his message just to fit in. He stood firm, even when it left him standing alone. And maybe that's the hardest choice of all, doing what's right when it isn't easy, when it isn't popular, when nobody's cheering you on. I wonder, have you ever been in a room full of people, but felt like the only one willing to say what really needed to be said? That's where integrity is born, not in comfort, but in courage. But you know, it wasn't just about courage for Jeremiah, it was empathy. He let himself feel the pain of his people. He cried for them, openly, vulnerably, without shame. Sometimes, in a world that wants us to be tough, Jeremiah's tears remind us that real strength is found in compassion. What if we let ourselves care a little more deeply? What if we let someone else's heartbreak move us, not just to feel, but to act? And then there's this. When you really live with truth and empathy, sometimes you'll be misunderstood. You might feel isolated, even by people you love, but maybe that's the price of living authentically. Remember, every big change in history started with one voice willing to stand apart, so don't be afraid if you feel alone. You're in good company. But even in the darkest moments, Jeremiah never gave up hope. He believed that renewal is always possible, that what looks like the end is really just a beginning. Maybe you're carrying a heavy story right now, a loss, a regret, a broken dream. Jeremiah's message is for you. Nothing is too lost to be found again. So how do you put this into practice? Start by finding a community that values the truth, even when it stings. Maybe it's a small group, a team, a circle of friends who hold each other accountable and lift each other up. Don't settle for shallow connection. Look for people who challenge you to grow. And then, practice kindness and honesty every day. Offer feedback gently. Listen with an open heart and never lose sight of compassion, even when you disagree. Let me ask you, what's the truth you've been afraid to speak? Who's the Jeremiah in your life the one who calls you to something higher, even when it's hard to hear. And who have you been Jeremiah for? Willing to risk discomfort to offer hope, or a word of challenge, or a moment of support? Here's my challenge. Don't let this be just another story. Let it shape you. Let it move you to stand for something bigger than yourself, to comfort someone who's hurting, to believe that even from the ashes, something beautiful can rise. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's build a community where truth and hope aren't just words, but a way of living. The world needs your courage. Your story matters. What will you stand for? Starting today. So here we are, at the end of Jeremiah's story, but maybe at the very beginning of your own. If there's one thing I hope you remember, it's this. True greatness isn't about being perfect or popular or always getting it right. It's about staying faithful when the world turns away. It's about letting your heart break for what matters, about daring to hope even in the ruins, about speaking truth with compassion and letting yourself be changed by the hands of the potter. Jeremiah was never celebrated in his time. He faced rejection, loneliness, and heartbreak, but he left behind a legacy that has inspired millions. Why? Because he was willing to stand for something bigger than himself. Because he trusted that hope would outlast despair. Because he believed with every fiber of his being that even the hardest stories can have a redemptive ending. So as you walk into your next challenge, your next conversation, your next ordinary day, ask yourself, what does it mean to live with integrity, to speak truth, to love deeply, even when no one is watching? How can you become a Jeremiah for your family, your friends, your community? And who is someone you can encourage to stand strong right now? Let this story light a fire in you. Let it remind you, you are never too small, too broken, or too alone for your life to matter. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your questions, your own experiences of hope and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video so the message of faith, courage, and renewal can reach even more hearts. Remember, your voice matters, your story matters, and the next chapter starts today. Are you ready to write it?